Hi everyone. Good evening. Yes, so my dog got chipped in, and I'm here. I'm presenting. So glad. I'm really glad that I was part of this conference. I learned a lot, and so I'll be presenting on behalf of myself and my mentor, Dr. Lalit, who, because of some reasons, was not able to come to Brazil. So yeah. So my topic before I okay. Okay, yeah, works. Okay, so in today's presentation, what I was thinking when I saw actually the title of the conference was, underrepresented religious traditions. So Kashmir Saivism or Trika, the popularly known word is Kashmir Saivism, but I'm personally against the name. I will use Trika Shaivism or Trika System School, something like that. So in today's presentation, I have kept it really fundamental, like talking about the development and the fundamentals which make up Triga Shaivism. And why did I choose to do that? Because it's very important. Because of those fundamentals, only one can understand why the concept of Swatantra is actually so prominent for the school. And then how are they, how are they building up a worldview, or they're, explaining the process of creation, which is Abhasvad, according to them. And then my own reflections, which I've been really looking into deeply and trying to answer it from a trigger standpoint. So yeah, oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. So I would be starting with the religious philosophical development. So this is a word that I loved during my PhD times also, because this actually sums up what Trigashevism is. It does have a religious background, but that is so very important to for the philosophical development of the school and the time period when the school was coming about in the 9th century in Kashmir. Why the religion part of it, or the state of iconography or the mythology, is so important for the school, but I would be discussing shortly about it. So I would go straight to the mythological beginning. So this is just in points, just to explain the story really quickly. It's that in Kali Yuga, it's the dark age where knowledge is not there. The pure form of knowledge has vanished. So Shiva actually took pity on humanity and decided that he will provide the knowledge back again. So this is through the sage Durvasa that he gives or imparts all the knowledge to, and Durvasa with his three Manasputras or mind-born sons actually propagate the knowledge further. So the Advaita part where Shaivism is actually based in was propagated by Triambak. Now, there are many scholars who argue about this, that, was it Triambak or it was Srinath, or there are many controversies going on about it and the foundation of the school. But one has to understand that a very keynote here, which many prominent scholars like Mark Dubisky also believes in it, that you can just consider Srinath as the first guru, who may or may have, like, maybe come up in a dream, or maybe as a guru to Vasugupta, who wrote the foundational text of Trikashaivism, which is Shiva Sutra. So in that sort of lineage, this is the mythological beginning that they give to Trikashaivism. But Abhinav Gupta actually doesn't go into the mythological beginning part of it. He thinks that there should be a better explanation about it. So he uses the term paravak, which is also sort of an answer to the Shabdika philosophy, the grammarians, where he introduces the notion of paravak, where when we talk about speech vak, we usually talk about the three stages, which is Pashyanti, Madhyama, and Vyakri. So he introduces a new thing, which is Paravak. So I'm just going to read it. This is the only section that I'm going to read because it's beautifully translated. The universe itself exists as an unuttered thought and experience of the Supreme as Paravak. The Paravak is beyond all objective thought and speech in every form unimaginable. In this state, the expectancy of you is non-existent. The manifestation of the universe begins with the Paravak appearing in the form of that thought and experience. Please mind the that in the statement, which is held as a mighty vision. In this process, what the whole universe would be is still in the most germinal state, undifferentiated, as it cannot be completely put in thought, i.e., this or that. Now Paravak is transformed into the mighty vision. This vision is called Pashyanti. The manifestation of the universe progresses further with this content from the objects of discretion, thought, and experience. That differentiation of this and that comes alive in the field of vision. This is where Pashyanti transforms into Madhyama state or the middle, which is the link between Pashyanti, just the thought and experience, and Vyakhari, which is thought and experience expressed through speech. So, according to Abhinav Gupta in Vishwar Pratibhigna Vimarshini, he starts by saying that all the Shiv agamas and all the shastras are actually somewhere in the state of divine madhyama, and which are being translated into, which come into the stage of Vyakhari to the lineages that are there, and that's how they come up by saying, using the iconography of Shiva with 5 faces. That is how they're describing the 5 faces, that this is how the knowledge is being imparted, from Shiva to through different ways. So yeah, not dwelling it on further. Now let's come to the foundation of what Trigger Shaivism actually is stating. So it's the first statement is a big statement that I'm making, which I would be explaining in my further slides. That is an idealistic, monoistic, pantheistic, and absolutist school within Shaivism. Now it is rooted in the 64 Manasik Tantras, and Shiva is the ultimate reality. Mind you, there is not in the text that they state Shiva particularly as ultimate reality. They use the words like para, samvit, chitti to define what their ultimate reality is. But this is a popular known view that Shiva is the ultimate reality for the school. Now, this is very different from the other, non-dualist philosophy also. So now, why did I put up the point of rediscovery? It's not that the school was not followed or there were not practitioners before the discovery of these texts, but this was more of an oral tradition somewhere from the 10th century, late 10th century towards the early, I think, 19th century. I may be wrong because I'm not a historian, I'm not expert in that. But yeah, so it was more of an oral tradition, which was, the tradition was followed by a lot of Kashmiri Brahmins and Pandits, and that was more from one lineage to the other. And it's not important that if the father is a practitioner, the son had to pick it up. Somebody, if he was a guru, so some other Shishya could pick it up, and that's how the tradition was going. But the rediscovery actually then, the brought to the academic circle of what Shaivism is, the different categorization, what each school is standing into. So, and you can see the presence. It's not that, in way back in the 14th century, also the discussions were happening regarding, and they refer to it as Pratibhigna school, not even Triga Shaivism. So all that was happening till, the early 20th century. Now, going further, now there are a lot of scholars. This should be 21st century, I'm sorry. Yeah, so there were discussions about should this be included into Indian philosophy. So my main point is not that, but I just wanted to put up some literature on how scholars view it. So then scholars such as Kamlakar Mishra, B.N. Pandit, and R.K. Kaul, a lot of them came up with arguments how, okay, if they don't believe in Vedas, but okay, and if they believe in Vedas, this should not be the category of including something into Indian philosophical school as we know it, because that was the prevalent notion. So a number of scholars, presented arguments, and they use, in the previous slides, like they use the terms like how knowledge is deductive and inductive. This should be like a basis of inclusion of schools. Then they went into, okay, let's just say that they're great additions, and then these are some examples from a big corpus of literature which is present. So yeah, all those things kept on going, and then Mishra very beautifully wrote that it's more of an experiential tradition, and those should also have some value when we talk about Indian philosophy. So not yeah, and this is also one a part of the literature there. So you can see in the 20th century how there are arguments going on that why Trigashevism was not even part of scholarly discussion, and then you see 21st century scholars discussing that, okay, how we should deal with this question and other things. So yeah, going further, this is the summary of what I was trying to make point, but yeah, we are running out of time, so I would just go quickly to the fundamentals of what Trigashevism is talking about. So here, as I was telling that, the ultimate reality is known as Parasamvit, consciousness, self, Maheshwara, Chaitanya, Chitti, or Samvit. So the Chitti and Samvit are particular terms brought in by Abhinav Gupta to define the ultimate reality. And now the absolute, which is Shiva, this is what I'm going to use as a term for the presentation, is absolute, but it is incomplete without its Shaktis. So this is how it is somewhat giving an answer to Advait Vedant and trying to sidetrack itself from the prominent, non-dualist popular philosophy. So Shakti is the essence and the nature of Shiva, and Shakti is, as I was mentioning, it's inseparable from Shiv. So, and the main important point here, which is that everything exists within consciousness. So this is what the Shiva is, proposing. And then they say that Shiva can be perceived in a first-person perspective within oneself as one's higher self. So this was something which personally moved me, and I had a lot of questions regarding it. That okay, here you're bringing like a first person perspective. You're not even discussing God as somebody okay out there that we're having discussions about. This is something you're bringing towards to the core subjectivity and the realm of human agency and other dimensions. And then going further, that Utpal Deva actually exerts that Shiva is the individual self. So he states that individual self, or Pashu as we call it, is a reduced form of Shiva, or a limited form of Shiva himself. We are not so different from the ultimate reality, as the individual self is not different from Shiva. That's the point that I was trying to make. Then they go, and the beautiful thing about the system which I came across was in the lineage, they are building up the definition of their ultimate reality. So it's not that they're saying that the before us something was wrong, but they take it as a premise and they build something on it, and they're building something on it where Abhinav Gupta goes and bolts over and says, okay, we understand that consciousness is everything. Then he claims that it's also a praman. So from ontology, they've moved to metaphysics with, this Somananda and Utpal Deva, and Abhinav Gupta comes in with his big guns and says, no, let's talk about epistemology also. We are a proper philosophical system where we have the ranges to explain it like a philosophical system. So this was just an example that I was giving. So now, when we talk about sort of the conception of God, here, the Shivites are not really differentiating between God or Shiva. They're just saying that they are one. They're not making a differentiation that, it exists somewhere else and the ultimate reality is something else. They're just talking about the same thing. So here again, so Shiva or Chaitanya or self, here I'm using capital S, exists independently without support, they're saying, and it's absolute, unborn, and beginningless. Then they go on to say that everything in the universe is a self manifestation of Shiva. So Shiva is the cause of the universe, projecting it through his Shaktis. God is identical with Shiva, who is the ultimate reality. Unlike the personal deity in many theistic traditions, Shiva in Trigashevism is both transcendent and immanent. So it is beyond all forms, but it is also present in everything. That's the claim that they're making, which is a very stronger, argument that they're trying to put in. Shiva is not separate from the universe. He is the universe itself. So again, before we come up with the questions of gender, why am I using he or she? This is how the texts are defining him. That's why I'm using he. So yeah. Then very easily they sweep in with iconography also, because if we go a little back to the history, so when school was forming in the 9th century, already there was a huge wave of Buddhist philosophy going on in Kashmir, and already Shankaracharya had already traveled and tried to have an argument against that school and everything. So with all the things, but there was already an underflowing wave of Shaivism as sort of in a worship way. So they use that to their advantage to boost up their philosophy, where they put in Shiva with the 5 faces, as I was discussing earlier. So now they define those 5 faces as the 5 main Shaktis that come about, which is Chit, Anand. There should be Anand, Chit, Icha, Gyan, and Kriya. So that's how they bring up again and again these iconographic terms. And then they again use those 5 face analogy to bring in the 5 main, purpose what Shiva does. It's he creates and he preserves, he dissolves, but they add on the 2 amazing things, which is conceal and grace, which are anugrah, which becomes a very very important topic of discussion of liberation here, while they add in this point. And also the beautifully how they merge the sense of Nataraj when they talk about Spandakarika, or Shakti as a form of vibration or a throb. So all that comes into the picture with them. Now coming on to the basis of my talk. So Swatantriya is also one of the Shaktis of Shiva. This is actually its absolute freedom or autonomy that Shiva has. This is his core nature. It's not different from it. So now this is a defining feature, as through this Shakti, Shiva becomes dynamic, he's creative, and he's a self-aware being. So the universe is free and spontaneous manifestation of this divine autonomy. Liberation or moksha is realizing one's own inherent freedom, which is identical to Shiva's Swatantriya. So now they bring in sort of the practical way of liberation, and they try to say that, okay, we are saying that you are Shiva, but that is also how to become Shiva is to, realize the infinite freedom or autonomy that you have. And then Shiva or Parasambit is actually Swatantriya himself. He reveals himself to himself out of his Swatantriya as the Vishwa. Shiva, by concealing his nature, appears as countless objects and subjects. I wrote in Sanskrit. But Trigas philosophy states that Shiva, by reducing himself to countless subjects and objects, does not forget his own nature. So this is how they're trying to say that this is how we are progressing from one state of evolution to the other. This is because Shiva, when even in the reduced form, he's not forgetting himself, that he has reduced to an individual being or an animal or the object. So he is self-dependent and absolute freedom, creative power, and so these are the different definitions one can get from the word Swatantriya itself. Now, coming back to the 5 faces that seems to be a running theme also for 3 slides here. Now, Shiva, because he's using all these things like to create and to preserve and to dissolve, and also the 2 main important things is also from hide and to unhide again. So these are the powers that he's using. So from Swatantriya, he's using the main 5 powers in manifestation. This is how they're trying to explain it. So from this, and the important point here, they try to differentiate themselves with is that unlike in Advaita Vedanta, Brahman is passive and impersonal. Shaivism views Shiva as active and dynamic. That is something that I would be talking about it again towards the end of my PPT. Yeah, and going further. So yeah, the universe is not a result of karma or a necessity, but a free expression of Shiva's divine play, which is Leela. That's how they're defining it. That Shiva creates not out of compulsion, but through his independent will. Liberation is realizing one's own swatantriya, that is recognizing that the individual self or Atman is Shiva. And the bondage of ignorance of Vidya is an illusion because the true nature of the self is already free. So that's the claim that they're making. Now, this is a very basic diagram which all Indian philosophy scholars know how they are talking about creation. So they say that, okay, in creation, the effect is one with the cause, and the effect is different from the cause. That's how they're differentiating. So we stick to the effect is one with the cause because that's where our school is standing. So now the effect is real. We were talking about this, and the other is that the effect is an appearance. So in this, both Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism are trying to step in, where they say this is the a position of Vivartvad is actually the position of Advaita Vedanta, with this saying that it's illusionary and it's a superimposition, where Trika Shaivism try to introduce something different by saying Abhasvad, that it's not illusionary, it's actually a self-projection of Shiva. And this the idea of the table is borrowed from Kamlakar Mishra. Yes. Now, this is something which they say is very different, where they say that the universe that we are seeing is real because Shiva is manifesting it out of his own free will. So it's not illusionary. And the appearance, you may say that, oh, it's illusionary or appearance from an Advaitic point of view, but it's not. It can't be illusionary or false because it's Shiva's own manifestation and he's doing it out of his own free will. So this is how they're connecting Swatantriya with creation, the theory of creation. So yeah, so okay, and obviously the last point is very important, where they say that Shiva is the material and efficient cause of the world. Going further, so you will find in the text of Ishwar Niharika and Vimarshani, where again, as I was saying, that Utpal Deva is making a claim that the both the kriya or the manifestation in this form it exists both inside and outside and belongs to one entity with two forms. And so Abhinav Gupta is saying that they're actually building up on the foundation of their predecessors. So Abhinav Gupta comes in with this commentary and says that consciousness, somewhat, as I was saying, manifests as both internal and external reality. So he builds up on Utpal Deva's claim and then says that the same consciousness supports both agent and action. So the Kriya point of the point that I was talking about, Utpal Deva, there, this is how Abhinav Gupta is trying to connect it here. And saying that Shiva, being free and autonomous, Swatantriya, sustains both realms. So they're not even leaving a margin for somebody to point out the finger that, oh, how is it sustaining an agent? Another thing, so they just bring in the concept of Swatantriya again to say that, oh, he can because he's free and he can support both realms. Now they go further by explaining about that, the externality is merely an attribute, not the essence of a being or non-being. Now they bring in the concept of, they think that, okay, one knows that it's Shiva. So all the exterior things or the appearances or the inferences or the perceptions we are making, they're just untrue because we are concealed. We are not remembering ourselves as Shiva. So this is how they introduce the concept. Oh, this is something that we already discussed. Okay, so yeah, this is a very important point. So this is how then they bring in the concept of pratyabhigna, which is recognizing oneself, not remembering, but recognizing oneself as Shiva. So this is how they are trying to construct something step by step, as other Indian philosophy schools do. And then Utpaldeva argues, this is against Samkhya that he's arguing, that there you have to give the authority to God. Prakriti, or the individual self, they can't, it's not possible, their existence is not possible without a conscious agent. And he says that God is essential because he should know both Prakriti and the individual souls, and he should be there to resolve conflicts of individual correlations, and it has to serve as the efficient cause of creation, because without it, nothing, both of them can't exist according to them. So with this, the last 5 minutes I want to dedicate to the questions that I had in mind while I was going. So these are very fundamental topics of Kashmir Saivism, which are very important to understand, because while they say that, Pashu, or the individual self, is a reduced form of Shiva, this is the basis of stating that, and this is why they have a more practical approach to liberation. So there are actually 3 points that I want to make here. One is about pratibhigna that I was talking about. So they state that as an epistemological tool which is used for liberation. They say if we state such kind of a creation and we say that, okay, Pashu is a reduced form of Shiva, so then only he has the agency to work towards liberation. And in Tantra Lok, I have not mentioned the sutra here, but Abhinav Gupta actually makes a very bold claim. And Jayarath, in his commentary, tries to, decipher what Abhinav Gupta was trying to say. So in that Tantra Lok, Abhinav Gupta states that the liberation which is promised by other Indian philosophical school, it's below than what the Shaivites are promising you. So they actually place the liberation of Sankhya at the Purish state. So now here they have 36 tattvas, unlike what Samkhya have. They have included more tattvas. So they just say at Purish level, they are promising you liberation. Advait Vedanta goes further and promises you liberation at Brahman. Maybe that's their ultimate reality. I'm not saying that one becomes that, but I'm just saying that at that level, they're promising liberation. But that is also at the level of Sadashiv, which is the third tattva. So they go on to say that we are promising liberation at Shiva level, which is way up than what even Advaita Vedanta is promising. That is only possible when such kind of creation, and that Abhas, the concept of creation, comes in as not an illusion, but a real manifestation of Shiva. And the second point I want to bring in, that they given a lot of autonomy or freedom to even Pashus to even go towards liberation. So they are not, by not having a differentiation between God, creation, and the individual being, they say that you can be here, but you can move out of this. And that's how they come up with giving, because it's a tantric school as well, they have foundation into that. That's how they're promising that through doing upayas and different levels of upayas, then they go into arguments about, at different stages, how you can have dikshas, and this is how the practical way of liberation is. By this philosophy you can get there, but at the end they come back to the fifth magical point, which is grace, which was I was mentioning earlier, which is divine grace or shakti path. That again they give power to Shiva himself, that even after doing the upaya, Abhinav Gupta also this is where he goes against his predecessors and say there should not be 3 upayas, there should be a fourth one, where you have done everything, but you're patiently waiting for Shiva to say, okay, you can cross the threshold. So that grace should also be given that kind of importance. So the reflections that I wanted to do is how they are, firstly, how they're supporting, liberation in a practical way is by giving Pashu also that kind of autonomy. The second is the human agency part. And because this conference was coming with these point of human agency, I also wanted to think about that if we are no different than Shiva himself or God himself, then each individual, even though we are reduced from a Shiva, do we have a personal connection with our own higher self? So, because we have different realms of experience, of perception, and inference as different levels of being. So, the self, do we have like a personal connection there with our own higher self? And that higher self is the same for everyone, but do we have like a imperfect, perfect personal connection with that ultimate reality? So, with that, my 30 minutes are up. And yeah, these were the questions that I was actually dealing with when I was, trying to write the paper and think about these lines. So I'll just quickly read out the questions. How does Trikashaivism's metaphysical framework reshape the relationship between the creator and creation? What are the implications of Shiva's absolute freedom, Swatantriya, for the concept of human agency in Trikashaivism? How does Trikashaivism reconcile divine sovereignty with human freedom? And how does it differ from Western theological perspective? Yeah, there are three more. How does the concept of Swatantriya, Trikashaivism, so this is again the repetition of what the last question was a little, but in what ways Trikashaivism challenged the dualist separation between divine and the material world, as we were discussing, and how it can be like, immanent and transcendent at the same point. So these were the references that I was using to even make the PPT. So yeah. Thank you. With that, I leave you. Thank you.